It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you just contact me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. A really fascinating guest today, Jason Horsley. He's living over there in Spain. You can find his website, landmademan.com, and you can find him on Twitter at Jake, P-H-A-S, Jake P-H-A-S, that's right. It's coming up with a book called The Kubrickon about Stanley Kubrick. I just happened to do a little binge watch of all the Kubrick movies, so I'm looking forward to that. We're going to have him come back about that. But today we just want to meet and get to know Jason Horsley. Mr. Horsley, are you there?
Oh, hi, Ed. Yeah, I'm right here in Spain.
How'd you wind up in Spain?
I was looking for a place to retire from society and civilization, which is something I've been trying to do since my 20s, really, but I don't know, it took a sort of global apocalypse to really get me motivated. So I moved from Canada to Spain at the end of 2020 in time with all of this, these recent developments. And the idea is, as the website indicates, is to go back to the land, not in any really heavy, hardcore way, but just in terms of living in a small community and growing our own vegetables and having animals and, turning off the TV kind of thing, little by little. So, that's where I ended up. And I speak Spanish because of being infatuated with Carlos Castaneda in my early 20s. I learned Spanish and moved to Mexico thinking I was going to be a sorcerer. So although that didn't happen, I've spoken Spanish since my 20s. So Spain was a logical place to come in terms of living naturally on the land, away from major populations and getting land property very cheaply.
That's very interesting because we were talking off the air on Twitter. I went to Spain myself, and I found I fell in love with Spain. The women in Spain are just so beautiful and they're just soft. Their eyes are just so soft.
Well, I brought my wife with me, so that wasn't really a factor.
Okay. Before we get into, I want to talk about Carlos Castaneda and all this kind of stuff. But tell us about yourself. For the audience who's never heard of Jason Horsley, tell them, who is Jason Horsley?
Yeah. Well, seeing as we've already covered the present, I'll go all the way to the past, which is that I was born into what I would call now as a Fabian family, although I didn't know it. The Fabian Society are a controlling force in British politics and social engineering. They're becoming better known in recent years. I certainly hadn't heard of them until my 30s or my 40s, but my grandfather on my father's side was a founding Fabian in Yorkshire, and so I was born into this very wealthy socialist, in quotes, family, and I inherited quite a lot of money because of that, but I wasn't interested in joining the family business or anything like that. So I became a traveler, and I was a writer. I was trying to write from a very young age. And then in my mid-20s, I entered full-on crisis, and I got rid of the family fortune. I basically just threw it away. I mean, I could have done it a lot better than I did it, but essentially I just felt I needed to wash my hands of the blood money and just strike out completely on my own. So that was what I did in my mid-20s. I moved to Africa, Morocco, and was living on the street and just really roughing it. And little by little, I mean, I've been traveling really since then. I think I finally settled in Spain after settling in Canada for quite a large period. But yeah, most of my life I've been traveling and writing. And I mean, that's what I would be most known for right now, besides my podcasting. I had a podcast called The Limitless for a number of years. I'm not really doing that now. But I've written about 12 books or something in the last 30 years. And they well, the early ones I'm a bit embarrassed by, to be frank, because I felt that I was really under the sway of some occult ideological contamination. But since I turned about 40 anyway, the books I've written, they've been a series of psycho-spiritual, socio-political, cultural explorations. Like, I've been trying to work out what's going on in the world, what happened to me that made me so dysfunctional and messed up, and to separate the influences of society, and I'm talking about the darker aspects of society that most people aren't even aware of, from my own psyche, understand myself better by understanding the world better, and vice versa. That's kind of a short capsule summation of what my method's been. They're narrative non-fiction books that explore large-scale, long-term socio-cultural engineering of different kinds, more commonly known as conspiracy theory, but we both know that's not a very respectable term these days. In fact, I think it's probably illegal. But I also think there's a far more subtle and nuanced approach it's required for these kind of things. And so anyway, that's my condensed version. That it's a series of books and podcasts and other creative projects have resulted from that. With 30, 40-year spiritual journey that I've been on, that has always, from a very young age, dovetailed with what I call paranoid awareness, and awareness of the darker, more malevolent aspects of our society.
Okay, before we get back into your history, since you mentioned that you've kind of retreated into the farmland of Spain, are you still in contact with other like-minded thinkers and stuff like that, or have you?
Yeah, I've been heavily involved actually with other like-minded thinkers, particularly in some other area that's more primarily spiritual. I've done a lot of work with a man called Devin Thomas O'Shea who lives in Finland, and that sort of brought these two interests together, because I have a very small audience, and I try to find a way out of hell, as I put it, as my last book was 16 Maps of Hell, which is, there's no point in mapping hell if it doesn't lead you to identify the exit, and there's no point in finding the exit if you don't use it. And that's where the spirituality comes in, for lack of a better word. Anyway, so yeah, I've done a lot of online work, mostly online, unfortunately, with the like-minded or the kindred spirits, and it has tailed off in the last few months, but that's not a direct result of me being in Spain. I still have the internet, and I still have lots of connections, and I still use some social media and whatnot to some degree. Significantly less, I would say. But it's a good question, because for me, the real point of having a creative output is to reach other souls and make connections with them. I don't see any other real gain to that, because I don't see that our society is worth climbing the ladder of, besides for that reason.
Well, that's fascinating. But I ask you for my own selfish benefits, because I find myself having less face-to-face contact with like-minded thinkers and stuff, and more relying on the internet and social media to reach out and have a fellowship with other, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it has been a long... besides, let's say, there's Devin O'Shea in Finland. Yeah. There are meetings there, and I still participate in that. But beside that, it's true that almost all of my good, meaningful conversations and connections are currently online.
And it's so difficult too, because then when you do meet someone in person, you've just been talking to I've been talking to Jason Horsley all day. I've been talking to someone very fascinating and interesting. Try and compete with that. So it becomes very difficult. Now you mentioned too a cult influence. Now, how did this come about?
Well, consciously it came about when I discovered. Well, I was introduced to an astrologist by my mother. And the astrologer recommended Carlos Castaneda, and reading Carlos Castaneda just turned my head around 180 degrees. I'm like, oh my God, if this stuff is real, I got to recalibrate my goals here. I was interested in becoming a filmmaker and getting into Hollywood and stuff. I mean, I wasn't entirely superficial in that way, but I was sufficiently superficial to think that was a worthwhile goal. And I hadn't. After I read Castaneda, I got into Jung around the same time. I became more and more conscious of the occult dimensions of experience. I changed my sights and set them more on the spiritual empowerment, if you will, which is the occult path anyway. And so that led me to look into Aleister Crowley, because I'm English. I'd heard about Crowley, kind of dismissed him, but when I discovered Castaneda, I realized I probably couldn't dismiss Crowley. And so one thing led to another, and in my 20s, I just became full-on occultist, ritual performing, esoteric knowledge gathering, wannabe sorcerer, shaman. It was a hellacious mix of all kinds of influences. In a way, that partly saved me, I think, because I never took one particular system to heart, really. Mm-hmm. Castaneda mostly, but I never took Crowley to heart, thank God. But I was just taking the bits that I felt I could use and trying to create my own mythology. It's, as you mentioned before we started, it certainly led to having had a very interesting, in quotes, life, and very dramatic life, but it also led to a lot of self-destructive behaviors and ideological pollution, I would say. I mean, just bad ideas.
When you look back at your life as an occultist, practicing the occult, do you see that as a positive or a negative?
Well, I like to say that it was a positive insofar as I learned all the wrong moves, as I was going to use that as a name for my memoir. All the things that don't work, I did a crash course in that. And that's my view of occultism overall, maybe of almost everything, actually, in terms of systems, is that it simply doesn't work. But it works. Well, like fame and success work up to a certain point because they satisfy certain infantile needs in us, which I've traced back to trauma in my own life. And so they can be a superficial or even a deep form of empowerment, but they don't actually lead to healing or resolution. And so in that sense, I was lucky because it never quite worked for me. So I wasn't able to become a successful sorcerer any more than I was able to become a successful Hollywood filmmaker or anything like that. I just kept getting it wrong. But I felt I was also discovering why it wasn't working for me. Like, it wasn't just that I was doing it wrong, but that something in me sensed that this was the wrong path for me. So, I mean, a simple example would be psychedelic drugs. I did a lot of those, DMT, LSD, mushrooms, salvia divinorum. And at the end of the day, as in by the time I turned 40 and realized I wasn't going to do them anymore, and how much damage they'd done to me psychologically and physically, I just came away with this, that I really have some deep experiential wisdom about why not to do psychedelics, and that is useful. I mean, because they're very popular and they approach those things very naively. So you could say I took a hit for the team, if you wanted, right? Because I have been able to communicate the follies and the foibles of the occult path, I think, more effectively than I would have done if I hadn't gone so deep into them. But I think more effectively than most people can, because of having that direct experience with the dark side.
And what have you found satisfaction from?
Well, creativity is certainly one that stuck with me. I mean, I love writing specifically, but any kind of creative use of the imagination and just, making things. Communication is part of that. I mean, I create in order to communicate things. And then beyond that, it probably would have to be real simple things that hopefully everybody has some sense of enjoyment, like human community, human intimacy, love and sex, good sex, loving relationships, nature, being in nature, animals, pretty simple stuff, which again is where the occult path is focused on the kind of infinite principles or higher archetypal principles, and there's, well, I mean, certainly I don't, I could